Hello! Now my goal for today is to try and talk you around the newly expanded AMG GT range without getting too bogged down in letters, model designations and numbers. This is going to be tricky, bear with me, I will do my best. What do we know? Well, that basically the AMG GT is a reimagined SLS without the gull-wing doors and with a 4-litre twin-turbo V8 in place of the naturally aspirated 6.2 we all knew and loved very much indeed. It keeps the same transaxle layout, so the gearbox is in the back, it's a 7-speed dual clutch, and after a bit of a shake-up, all AMG GTs now have this, what they call Panamericana grille, and some active air management behind it which automatically opens and closes flaps for the brakes and intercoolers according to what the engine is demanding. So that is your basic GT. The range starts, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, starts with your basic GT, which is 100 grand. It has 476 horsepower, passive dampers and a mechanical locking diff. Then you go to the S, that's got 522 horsepower. It's got adaptive dampers and a fancier electronic locking diff, all controlled with ESP and all that kind of stuff. Still with me? Right, the car we have here, this is a GT C. Now then, this was launched in roadster form. This is the first time we've driven it as a coupe. This gets 557 horsepower, quite a bit more. More significantly, it also gets this wide track rear end with expanded, the kind of wide body look, which gives it a whole different stance. Within those wheel arches is four-wheel steering. That's one of the major upgrades over the S in this car. Then you have the R, which is basically this car with the four-wheel steering, an even more powerful engine, 585 horsepower in that case, and some trick active aero. Also weighs about 70 kilos less than this car. Still with me? I hope so. If we cut to the basics, I think this could well be the pick of the GT range, given that it has the more powerful engine. It's also got the fancy four-wheel steering and some of the other gadgets and gizmos from the R, but it's maybe a bit more of an everyday car, as much as a 500 odd horsepower V8 powered super coupe can be. I think it looks awesome. I really love this wide body look in particular. These rear arches give it a very different stance to the regular GT, particularly from low down. You'll see it's got these extra vents here on the back. They are a kind of trademark feature of the wide body versions of the GT. In terms of where it sits in the market, I guess, well, this one would cost you about £139,000, which is only £4 less than the R, which is an interesting price point. This is an edition 50 version though, with all some extra trimmings for AMG's half-century celebrations. When the standard GTC comes out, I reckon it'll probably be more like 130. A 911 Turbo S, that is about £147,000, so it's a bit less than the 911 Turbo S, which I think this goes up against. The R, meanwhile, that's more like a GT3 RS rival, I think. So, as I say, this one has the potential to be the best in the range, I reckon. It's kind of like a mega mix, a best of all the things that we like about the GT wrapped up in one hopefully tempting package. Let's find out if that all adds up. Right, so hopefully I didn't completely bore you to tears with that tortuous explanation of where this GTC sits in the AMG GT range. Still with me at the back of the room? Hopefully you are now. Yeah, there we go. A bit of AMG V8 noise to wake us all up and bring us back onto what really matters about this car, how it goes. Now then, I've been lucky enough to drive all sorts of different AMG GT variants and also the SLS before it, so hopefully I'm in a good position to be able to explain how this car drives in comparison with some of those other models. Now, the extra power is of course welcome. Who doesn't want a bit more power? But really the bigger factors that influence the way this car goes are the four-wheel steering in particular, and the kind of recalibrated fixtures and fittings. So one of the things you get on this C is the Dynamic Plus package, which adds things like active engine mounts, active transmission mounts that stiffen up when you go into the race mode that you get as part of that package. Now, well, you can have that on an S, but it costs you another, well, £1,795, I think, off the top of my head. So that obviously adds a bit of money to the price of that car, but you get it as standard on this C, and it all means that when you turn it up to race, as I just did there, you get more than a taste of the R. Now, you don't get the active aero on that car or some of that, the fancier features that are included on that, but you certainly get a taste of it. And yes, I think for a bit of the R's kind of fearsomeness, but in a slightly more all-round package. The GTC is a really, really nice blend. Now we'll just turn it back a bit to my individual setting there. Now, as I say, that four-wheel steering is perhaps the most significant thing. Now, having driven various other GTs, I'm still not entirely sure about it. I almost prefer the basic version, because it's got an old-fashioned mechanical diff. It's got these really nice Multimatic passive dampers, and it feels a bit more like the SLS. It's a bit more old school. This is the other way. This is a lot more high-tech. You've got adaptive dampers, electronic diff, four-wheel steering, all the rest of it. Does it detract from the driving experience? Well, actually it doesn't, because it's all calibrated really nicely. Now, all GTs have got quite light steering. That's one of the first things you notice, which is kind of at odds with the whole kind of macho feel of the car. And it's kind of exacerbated a bit by the four-wheel steering, because obviously that means that you need to put even less input in with the wheel to get the turning effect that you wanted. So it makes the car feel very darty and agile, and perhaps almost falsely so, because it's kind of accentuating that. But overall the car's very well balanced, and that really shows, because you've got all the heavy stuff between the axles. So the engine and the gearbox are both between the axles, and that fundamentally makes a massive difference to the way the car handles. I mean, if compared with an F-Type, for instance, where the engine's out the front, the gearbox is at the front, this just has all its weight in the middle, and there's quite a lot of it. Now, it's worth pointing out that one of the big differences between this and the R is the weight. This has all the gadgets and gizmos of the R, but it weighs another 70 kilos. So as well as being down on power a little bit, it's also carrying around a fair bit of extra bulk. It's about 1,700 kilos with a driver. That's give or take around the same as 911 Turbo and an R8. It's kind of comparable. It's not particularly light, it's not particularly heavy, but it's on the money. But the four-wheel steering definitely makes it feel agile and light. It contrives a sense of lightness, and here on the road it's just got a lovely flow to it. Now I'm in I'm in my comfort dampers. I've got aggressive engine, noisy exhaust, comfort dampers, and that's a really nice setting for the road. It's a complicated car, but the calibration is really, really good. It all just blends together really nicely. I think they made a really cohesive car that it makes the most of that natural balance, and it just means it just has flow, which I think some of the other cars it's up against don't manage to pull off. So it lives up to the kind of GT badging. It is a GT, as we've discussed, but I think it's got a harder edge about it as well, which I think it's probably not quite as focused as a 911 Turbo S, but it's not far off, and I'd argue that it's probably a bit more fun in the way it goes about it. So I'm kind of torn. I really like the basic GT, but I also like the way the technology enables this car to do just that little bit more and be both more comfortable, like a GT should be, but also offer more than a taste of that fearsome R-spec car. So yes, you are kind of getting more than one GT in one package with this, which is really quite appealing. It's a great road car. I look forward to driving on the track at some point. I think it'd be really interesting to drive it. I drove the R recently, and that was incredible, much more capable than you'd ever thought a front-engined car could be, or front mid-engined car could be. We can't drive this car without talking about the engine though, can we? Now, AMG had to go turbocharged like everybody else. I'd argue it's done a better job than most people. This Hot V V8 has, well, it's obviously sounds amazing, that's a given, but it goes well too. So if I put my foot down in fifth, there's a slight softness about the pedal there initially, but it doesn't really, it's nothing you would call lag there. And once you're up in the revs, this engine has both more low-down torque than the 6.2 ever had, and it's got mid-range and it's got top end too. It really does have everything. We've got noise, we've got power, we've got torque, we've got mid-range, we've got top end. I don't really see what AMG has lost by going turbocharged. I really don't. It's a fabulous motor. It'll be interesting to drive this in the next generation of Aston Martins as well, because of course that's where this engine is going to end up in the not too distant future. So it's a great package. I think it all just adds up, and it's a car that puts a smile on your face. I think that's the main thing. I think cars in this price bracket, again, I keep coming back to the 911 Turbo. It's a really, really great car. It's a fabulous car, but it's very serious. You know, you don't smile when you're driving a 911 Turbo S. You might swear at how quickly it accelerates, but it's not a car for kind of goofy grins, whereas AMG just manages to be both as serious as Porsche, but also pull off the kind of emotional heartstrings, big grin while you're driving along thing. And I think that all just works. I like the old school vibe, I like the muscle car feel about it, but there's now sophistication, especially with the extra gadgets and gizmos on this GTC, the four-wheel steering and all the rest of it, that just wasn't there in AMGs of old. I think this is AMG maturing in this 50th year. I think this is an appropriate celebration. Yep, I think this may well be the best GT in the range.